Welcome to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On the last show, our first Halloween special, we took a ride into the horrors of 1974 Stepney, overrun by a terrifying breed of large and rather vicious rats. We had fun, the feedback was great, and we even did a short Patreon exclusive looking at the Canadian movie adaptation, Deadly Eyes. It was thoroughly enjoyable, our venture off the beaten track, and, for all of its flaws, I'm tempted to take a look at the first sequel to The Rats, Lair, but that's for some time in the future. Also, our mate Alan, hello Alan, asked if we'd cover The Fog. I'll give that some thought too, and it's in scope to be fair, as that was another Pop's hand-me-down back in the day. Primarily though, this is a Moorcock flavoured podcast. So on this show, we're back in familiar territory as Loz returns, and we rejoin Corum on his journey towards epic confrontation with the forces of chaos. As it happens, Book 2 is only about 20 pages long, but we make the best of it anyway, with a few salty beers and probably a load of old guff along the way. So, sit back, feed your caged god some sweetmeats, and join us in Derry and Tom's as we delve into the Night of the Swords, Book 2. Alright, we're back in virtual Derry and Tom's, and Loz has made his triumphant return to look at the Night of the Swords Book 2, the epic, lengthy Night of the Swords Book 2, which I'm sure will keep us rolling for quite a while. Welcome back, Loz.
Thank you very much. I think we've really set out the epicness of this particular podcast by possibly choosing the shortest book in the universe.
Yeah, so despite the fact we have really, really laboured, in the best possible way, obviously, some Michael Moorcock books where they're split into 3 books, which is very, very handy, other than The Eternal Champion, where we just had to split it by roughly 60 pages per part. Coincidentally, we did The Rats all in one go, but, we don't want to spoil our record of doing 4.5 hours per 160-page Michael Moorcock.
How long is The Rats, then, is it?
The Rats was somewhere in the region of 200 pages. So it proves that, actually, if we put our mind to it, we could do a whole book in one podcast. But you know what? Where's the fun in that?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, you need a really severe lockdown to really... force yourself into that. 200 pages is a lot in one session.
Yeah, that is very true. And also, originally when I decided on doing this podcast, I thought, right, okay, Michael Moorcock's written about 120 books. If we get a minimum of 3 shows out of each one, I can really milk this for about 18 years. And that's without doing side pods.
Yeah, and when we get to the ice schooner, we've really we've nailed it, I think.
Yeah, okay, well... You make a valid point. Maybe the Golden Barge we might do in one go. Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah. God, I've not read that for years. I think there's probably a good reason.
Yeah, very possibly. But you know what? We'll revisit it at some point. Incidentally, today I was telling my team about the podcast because, of course, I tell everybody about the podcast at every possible opportunity. But a member of my team is Dutch. And I said to them all, because I'd raised on our team huddle. I work in the kind of environment where things are called huddles. So there's like 28 people on this huddle. And one of my colleagues, he does a podcast which is thoroughly entertaining. So we're talking about podcasts in front of these 28 people. And I said, incidentally, everybody, we did a Halloween special last weekend. And I know none of you have ever heard of Michael Moorcock. But surely someone out there has heard of James Herbert. And someone of my age must have heard of the Rats. And all 28 of them didn't have a fucking clue what I was talking about. Really? So we really are beyond niche when it comes to mainstream society, or certainly in where I work. But a member of my team, he said, well, my excuse is that I'm Dutch. And I said, aha.
Yeah.
But Michael Moorcock's been translated into a gazillion languages. So I looked it up, and actually there's quite a lot of Dutch Moorcock translations which have very, very funky names. So Elric of Melniboné is called Storm over Melniboné.
Like it.
Yeah. And as if to continue the theme, the quest for Tanelorn is called Storm over Tanelorn.
Like it.
Yeah.
Slightly better, I think.
Yeah, I really think they should have done the rest of them. Storm over the Golden Schooner or something.
Yeah.
I'm sure that would have worked. But anyway, I sent him links and said, you got no excuse now. get reading.
Well, I was talking to one of my friends today who's quite erudite in the book reading department.
Yeah.
And was talking about Moorcock and tonight possibly doing a recording.
Yeah.
And he said, oh yeah, did he write Wheel of Time?
Ugh.
And
if you'd have been in a room with him, I'd like to think you'd hit him.
I might have left in a huff, possibly. You know.
Oh, well, all right. That's a fair backup. I think extreme violence would have been preferable.
Well, that's what would have wanted, but you know, he's a friend. But I was quite surprised. There was like Wheel of Time, really?
Have you ever given the Wheel of Time a bash?
No, because it's the size of France.
Yeah,
and it's probably I've never even wanted to get near it, to be honest.
Yeah, well, there's like 10 volumes and volumes. There's 10 volumes. Yeah, that's how traumatic it is.
I think that is. It's volumes.
Yeah. There's 10 volumes, each one of them the size, certainly if not the size of France, the size of Burgundy at least. Yeah. And a friend of a friend recommended the Wheel of Time, and she said she actually wanted to do a Wheel of Time podcast. So I picked up the first one, and then a couple of weeks later I saw 2 and 3 in a charity shop. I thought I'll grab them as well. Excellent doorstops, but I
was going to say, were they keeping the door open?
Yeah, I read the first 60 pages. I was like, fuck this. there's just no way. I'm not wading through 28,000 pages of this nonsense. And then I think I mentioned it on Twitter, and she said, oh no, but it gets really good in the third book. It's like, all right, it gets really good after 2,500 pages. No.
Yeah.
I'll declare myself out right now. At the pace we do podcasts, if we did the Wheel of Time, an hour and a half per 60 pages, my God, we could really
but the thing is, though, by the time we finish it, we'll both have Alzheimer's, and I'd just be talking about just wheels or something.
Yeah.
Possibly time.
And I think quite on brand would get Alzheimer's halfway through the 9th book, or the 10th book, whichever one he didn't finish. Yeah, that would really... And our 150 listeners who've listened to us for 10 years would be really upset.
Yeah, and possibly would have to start from the first book again because we just forget everything. Nobody wants that, you know.
No,
yeah,
we're just not going to go there.
Was it Robert Jordan?
Robert Jordan, yeah.
That's
writer of some truly dreadful Conan books as well. Sorry, Robert Jordan fans. Yeah, he wrote, I think, half a dozen Conan novels.
Did he?
Where, you know, he talked about, I don't know, Conan as a kid working in his dad's blacksmith shop or whatever. It was you know, we don't need anybody to speculate on what errands Conan ran for his dad when he was 9.
What his favourite bread was or favourite sandwich.
Yeah, well, maybe for the role-playing game we need to know those things.
Well, yeah, obviously you need to roll 5. It's a ham sandwich.
That's
Excellent.
right.
Let's move on.
Oh, I wanted cheese.
I
fucked up my entire charge gen. Oh dear.
I don't know what that is, but I'll laugh along.
You call yourself a role player?
Well, I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's because you effortlessly resist being a geek at all costs, but it doesn't work. Right. I'm going into I'm going into my Fuller's Friends Hovey Doug, which is a wee heavy. 7.4% by volume. What does it say on it? I can't read it because it's too small and my eyes can't cope with it. Hang on. If I hold it a foot away, a Caledonian classic, this wee heavy is made using the malts with not a New World hop in sight. Smooth caramel and biscuit notes come to the fore in this rich, full-bodied ale. Hovey Doug? Well, because it's hovey like a Hovey Doug, of course. Whatever the fuck. Who gives a shit what they're saying?
To be honest, that
all sounds
would,
ridiculous.
That would be the worst advert I've ever heard.
Yeah.
No offence, but I think because you're drinking a pint of heavy, I think in memory of Sir Sean of Connery.
Yeah.
You should have.
I'll go and thump some women. Phil, line your chin up. I'm coming for you. In the nicest possible way, obviously.
And for people who need context of that particular scene.
Right, so this is actually quite a dark ale, surprisingly. Fortunately, it's not a pint, it's a 330ml bottle, which is usually a winner when we drink these stupid strong beers. Well, let's give it a go. We'll get to yours in a second. It's like a very, very syrupy brown ale. not altogether horrible. Actually, an improvement on what we've been drinking more recently. What you got?
Well, I was wearing the last one mostly because it exploded all over my trousers. Vicar.
Yeah.
So I was drinking stroke wearing Drifting, an American pale ale by the Electric Bear Brewing Company.
Oh, that's a good name.
Which has got really small rating, but I think it says beer. So that was nice. What I tasted of it, but this one I thought was more of a challenge. So I've gone for. It's called an Arbor Cafe Creme, a chocolate and coffee stout. With luxurious oatmeal stout brewed with freshly ground coffee and roasted cacao nibs.
You know, that sounds like the most hipster brew I think you could possibly imagine. Short of a mushroom sour. it don't get much more hipster than that.
Yeah, so that's what I've gone for, being the hipster of the two of us, obviously.
Yeah.
That's actually quite pleasant. It's got it does taste of a nice got a nice coffee note, chocolatey. 12%. No, it's not really. I'm only joking. It's a a conservative 6.9%.
Not bad.
But it's quite pleasant. We should have a couple of these when we meet up in the real world.
Yeah, well, we're actually making some level of progress then, aren't we, from the brake fluid plus raisins that we had last time around.
Yeah, that was quite hideous, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was unbelievably terrible. But we're here not just to drink beer, challenging strange beers. We're here to talk about the Knight of the Swords Book 2. So I suppose we should recap what went on in Book 1, which was essentially Corum, hipster, arty-farty, aristocrat, last of a number of dying families.
Hasn't he just spent his last kind of decade making some music? I mean, that's going to be a long piece of music, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Almost self-indulgent, you might say.
Unless it was just the same 3-minute single that he was just continually refining.
Yeah, that's what we used to do in the studio. We recorded the same song for 6 months.
Yeah. So could be possible. It maybe got 2 albums worth of material out of those 10 years. Yeah. That's what I like to think. Because otherwise he was spending far too much time in his gymnasia.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, his old man, who's getting on a bit, says, why don't you head out and find my extended family and just check on them or something. So,
it's a bit dubious, that, wasn't it? A bit of a dubious quest. It's like, you don't see how Uncle Derek is. Yeah, all right, yeah. But take your weapons just in case.
Yeah, unfortunately, when he gets to Derek and Mavis's house, they've been brutally moidered by the Mabden horde.
Yeah.
And he gets back to his own house and they've brutally murdered his family as well, in a rather spectacularly unpleasant fashion. And whilst tracking them, they spot him and terribly torture him and put his eye out and cut his hand off, but he manages to escape into one of the dimensions that the Vadak can shift into and escapes them. Gets some assistance from the Brown Man of La and some other Larker, who I forget. And then
some tall dude.
Yeah, some tall dude.
Yeah.
And then rocks up at Moidle's Mount, where the Margravine of Moidle's Mount, Relina, takes pity on him because she's just been widowed. Yeah.
Or maybe she's just nice.
Bit widowed at some point. So, of course, they fall in love, and then Glandith Acre, i.e. Oliver Reed, and his Mabden barbarian hordes turn up to cause a ruckus. They have a bit of a battle. Everything goes a bit pear-shaped. The Brown Man of La gets...
the brown guy, he gets chopped, doesn't he, and thrown onto the causeway, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. So they have more battling, and then Relina performs a summoning, and a dead ship turns up with a dead crew, and it turns out to be the Margrave, her dead husband. And in order to avoid the chop, they make a bargain, a pact with the Margrave, and Corum goes with them, and they set sail to...
the land of the Gorge God, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, they go somewhere because they need some help.
It's the equivalent of Ipswich, I think.
Yeah. So we kick off, and Corum is aboard the dead Margrave's ship, and Rowena is with him, entranced in the Margrave's quarters. And everything's a bit minging and a bit damp, because, of course, the ship's been at the bottom of the sea for a while. And by the way, this is book 2, in which Prince Corum receives a gift and makes a pact. And actually, that's quite a long description of book 2.
It sums it up, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So, Chapter 1, The Ambitious Sorcerer. As they sailed through the night, Corum made many attempts to waken Rowena from her trance, but nothing worked. She lay among the damp and rotting silks of a bunk and stared at the roof. Through a porthole too small to afford escape came a faint green light. Corum paced the cabin, still barely able to believe his predicament. These were plainly the dead Margrave's own quarters, and if Corum were not here now, would the Margrave be sharing the bunk with his wife? Corum shuddered and pressed his hand to his skull, certain that he was insane or had been entranced, certain that none of this could be. As a Varagi was prepared for many events and situations that would have seemed strange to the Mabden. Yet this was something that seemed completely unnatural to him. It defied all he knew of science. If he were sane, and all was as it seemed, then the Mabden's powers were greater than anything the Varag had known. Yet they were dark and morbid powers, unhealthy powers that were quintessentially evil. So, a couple of things to look at there. A bit queasy of Corum to think, would the dead Margrave be shagging his missus if I wasn't here? Steady on, Corum, son. That's a bit of a dark thought.
I was going to say that kind of sets up the entire book 2, doesn't it? Where he just basically spends most of his time going, "Is it a dream? Oh, yeah. Is it a dream? Is it reality? Oh my God, the humanity, etc."
Yeah, but it also reinforces the fact that the Varag are like a scientific and rational race rather than a typical fantasy magical race, because our protagonist, through whom we see all of this action, which is dimension-shifting gods, demigods, eyes and hands of dead gods and various other things, is actually kind of a rationalist, and he really struggles with all of this magical nonsense.
It's very, the Varag as well are very similar to the Melnibonians, aren't they? They're just like shut themselves away, ponce around a lot, really. Yeah. It's the dichotomy, isn't it? The Melnibonians went, let's take loads of drugs and do loads of horrible stuff. Varag went, let's ponce around doing poetry, possibly interpreting the gods through dance and making hats. Yeah.
Whereas the Melnibonians are, let's turn these 47 people into a surgically enhanced choir that all sing the same or different notes through their open wounds in their necks. But also we'll do demons and sorcery as well through our ancient tomes. Yeah, so there are kind of different versions of the same kind of deal. But I kind of, another reason why the Corum character is a little bit more appealing, I think, is the fact that he's more relatable because of all this, because he kind of tries to rationalise things and he has a rational approach to things.
Yeah, and he's generally, it's innocent abroad as well, isn't it? So he starts off as like, it's almost like a child, isn't he? But a child who kind of read a lot of books.
Yeah, basically he's a nerd, isn't he?
Yeah.
So Corum feels a lot of disgust at the slimy, rotten nature of the ship, although the locked door, whilst all the other wood seems to be rotten, the locked door is unusually strong and some other force seems to be at work there.
Magic doors.
Yeah, it's basically like, right, the GM says, everything's rotten, so we say, can we kick the door? And he goes, no.
Oh, the door. Oh, no.
No, something else going on there. So, yeah, there is some other force at work. It's like plot struck GM contrivance.
Yeah.
But to Corum, it all feels a bit dreamlike, and shortly he tries to see into other dimensions, which he's able to do generally, but he sees out, because it's just not working for him. And then things kind of dim. He stood in a dark hall with walls of fluted stone, which curved over his head and touched to form the roof high above. The workmanship of the hall was equal to anything the Varag had created, but it was not beautiful, rather it was sinister. His head ached. The air before him shivered with a pale blue light, and then a tall youth stood there. The face was young, but the eyes were ancient. He was dressed in a simple flowing gown of yellow samite. He bowed, turned his back, walked a little way, and then sat down on a stone bench that had been built into a wall. So I remember reading this years ago. I was thinking, this is Ariok, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. He's like a crap Ariok.
Crap Ariok, yeah. Kind of got golden, beautiful youth with ancient eyes, but it's not Ariok. It's
No.
Shul and hang on, who is it? Shul and Jivan. Jivan?
The Lord of all that is dead in the sea. It's specifically for the sea.
Yeah. One of his many titles. Of course, it's one of his many titles. Many titles, many guises. And we found that the dead ship, can't sail in the day. And Corum challenges Shul, suggesting his motive for being involved is that he relishes the horror. This is after he's kind of thought, right, okay, so is this a dream? I'm kind of in this place. Who's this guy? And it turns out that Relina's summoning, essentially, Shul and Jivan, answered the summoning, resurrected the dead Margrave to carry them where they were going. But it turns out Shul is a bit of a bugger, isn't he? Bit of a buggerish old Shul.
He's not even that though, is he? He's just a bit of a berk, isn't he? He's you know what I mean? He's one of the because they have a chat, don't they? And basically, it's quite a tedious conversation, isn't it? So you got Shul basically being the Donald Trump of kind of sorcerers with their own island, and you've got Prince Corum going, "Oh, is it a dream? Oh." Yeah. And it goes on for ages, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking we should do this as a reading because there's barely any narrative or description. It's all just dialogue interchange between Corum and Shul and Jivan. I think we should do this as a reading. Corum says, "Give me back Relina." He says, "I intend to."
And Corum looks suspiciously.
Says, "What?" So let's read from there. I'll be Shul and Jivan. You be Corum.
Great.
How does that sound? And we'll do it for 6 pages. There's an epic challenge.
That is a challenge when I can barely see, but let's go for it.
Let's do it. Drama class. Drama 101. You do not think I would bother to answer such a feeble attempt at a summoning as the one she made, do you? If I did not have other motives in mind.
Your motive is clear. You relish the horror of her predicament.
Nonsense. Am I so childish? I have outgrown such things. I see you are beginning to argue in Mabden terms. It is just as well for you if you wish to survive in this Mabden dream.
Is it a dream?
Of sorts. Real enough. Here's what you might call the dream of a god. There again you might say that it is a dream that a god is allowed to become reality. I refer, of course, to the Knight of the Swords, who rules the 5 planes.
The sword rulers? They do not exist. It is a superstition once entertained by the Vadhag and the Nadrak.
The sword rulers do exist, Master Corum. You have one of them at least to thank for your misfortunes. It was the Knight of Swords who decided to let the Mabden grow strong and destroy the old races.
Why?
Because he was bored by you. Who would not be? The world has become more interesting now. I'm sure you will agree.
So chaos and destruction is interesting? I thought you had outgrown such childish ideas.
Perhaps I have. But has the Knight of Swords?
You do not speak plainly, Prince Shul.
True. A vice I find impossible to give up. Still, it enlivens a dull conversation sometimes.
Well, if you're bored with this conversation, return Relina to me, and I will leave.
I have it in my power to bring Relina back to you and set you free. That's why I let Master Moidle answer a summoning. I wish to meet you, Master Corum.
You did not know I would come.
I thought it likely.
Why did you wish to meet me?
I have something to offer you. In case you refuse my gift, I thought it wise to have Mistress Relina on hand.
And why should I refuse a gift?
My gifts are sometimes refused. Folk are suspicious of me. The nature of my calling disturbs them. Few have a kind word for a sorcerer, Master Corum.
Where is the door? I will seek Relina myself. I'm weary, Prince Shul.
Of course you are. You've suffered much. You thought your own dream a reality, and you thought reality a dream. A shock. There is no door. I have no need of them. Will you not hear me out?
If you choose to speak in a less elliptical manner, aye.
You are a poor guest, Vadak. I thought your race a courteous one.
I'm no longer typical.
A shame that the last of a race should not typify its virtues. However, I am, I hope, a better host, and I will comply with your request. I am an ancient being. I am not of the Mabden. I am not of the folk you call the old races. I came before you. I belong to a race which began to degenerate. I did not wish to degenerate, and so I concerned myself with the discovery of ancient ways in which I could preserve my mind in all its wisdom. I discovered the means to do such a thing. As you see, I am essentially pure mind. I can transfer myself from one body to another, and with some effort, thus I am immortal. Efforts have been made to extinguish me over the millennia, but they have never been successful. It would have involved the destruction of too much. Therefore I have, generally speaking, been allowed to continue my existence and my experiments. My wisdom has grown. I control both life and death. I can destroy and I can bring back to life. I can give other beings immortality if I choose. By my own mind and my own skill I have become, in short, a god. Perhaps not the most powerful of gods, but that will come eventually. Now you will understand that the gods who simply popped into existence, who exist only through some cosmic fluke, they resent me. They refuse to acknowledge my godhood. They're jealous. They would like to have done with me, for I disturbed their self-esteem. The Knight of the Swords is my enemy. He wishes me dead. So, you see, we have much in common, Master Corum.
I am no god, Prince Shul. In fact, until recently I had no belief in gods either.
The fact that you're not God, Master Corum, is evident from your obtuseness. That is not what I meant. What I did mean was this. We are both the last representatives of races whom, for reasons of their own, the sword rulers decided to destroy. We are both, in their eyes, anachronisms which must be eradicated. As they replaced my folk with the Vadag and the Nadrag, so they are replacing the Vadag and the Nadrag with the Mabdan. A similar degeneration is taking place in your people. Forgive me if I associate you with the Nadrag, as it did in mine. Like me, you have attempted to resist this, to fight against it. I chose science, you chose the sword. I will leave it to you to decide which was the wisest choice.
You seem somewhat petty for a god. Now,
I am a petty god at the moment. You will find me more lordly and benign when I achieve the position of a greater god. Will you let me continue, Master Corum? Can you not understand that I have acted so far out of fellow feeling for you?
Nothing you've done so far seems to indicate your friendship.
I said fellow feeling, not friendship. I assure you, Master Corum, I could destroy you in an instant, and your lady too.
I'd feel more patience if I knew you had released her from that dreadful bargain she made and brought her here, so I could see for myself and see that she lives and is capable of being saved.
You'll have to take my word.
Then destroy me.
You should have greater respect for me, Master Corum.
And why is that? I've seen a few tricks and heard a great deal of pompous talk.
I'm offering you much. I warn you, be more pleasant to me.
And what are you offering me?
I am offering you your life. I could take it.
You've told me that.
I'm offering you a new hand and a new eye. I am offering you the return of this Mabdan female you have such a perverse affection for. Oh, very well, I apologise. Each to his own pleasures, I suppose. I'm offering you the opportunity to take vengeance on the cause of your ills.
Glandithacray?
No. The Knight of the Swords, the Knight of the Swords. The one who allowed the Mabdan to take root in the first place in this plane.
But what of Glandith? I've sworn his destruction.
You accuse me of pettiness. Your ambitions are tiny. With the powers I offer you, you can destroy any number of Mabdan elves.
Continue.
Continue? Have I not offered you enough?
You do not say how you propose to make these offers into something more than so much breath.
Oh, you are insulting. The Mabdan fear me. The Mabdan gibber when I materialise myself. Some of them die of terror when I make my powers manifest.
I've seen too much horror of late.
That should make no difference. Your trouble is, Vadag, that these horrors I employ are Mabdan horrors. You associate with Mabdan, but you are still a Vadag. The dark dreams of the Mabdan frighten you less than they frighten the Mabdan themselves. If you had been a Mabdan, I should have had an easier task of convincing you.
But could you not use a Mabdan for the task you have in mind? Am I right?
Your brains are sharpening. That is exactly the truth. No Mabdan could survive what you must survive, and I am not even sure of Vadag.
And what is the task?
To steal something I need if I am to develop my ambitions further.
Could you not steal it yourself?
Of course not. How could I leave my island? They would destroy me then, of a certainty.
Who would destroy you?
My rivals, of course. The sword rulers and the rest. I only survive because I protect myself with all manner of devices and spells which, though they have, at this moment, the power to break, they dare not do so for fear of the consequences. To break my spells might lead to the very dissolution of the 15 planes and the extinction of the sword rulers themselves. No, you must do the thieving for me. No other in this whole plane would have the courage or the motivation. For if you do this thing, I will restore Relina to you, and if you still wish it, you will have the power to take your vengeance on Glandith the Cray. But I assure you, the real one to blame for the very existence of Glandith is the Knight of the Swords, and by stealing this thing from him, you will be thoroughly avenged.
What must I steal?
His heart, Master Corum.
You wish me to kill a god and take his heart?
Plainly, you know nothing of gods. If you killed the knight, the consequences would be unimaginable. He does not keep his heart in his breast. It is better guarded than that. His heart is kept on this plane, his brain is kept on another, and so on. This protects him. Do you see?
You must explain more later now. Release Relena from that ship and I will try to do what you ask of me.
You are excessively obstinate, Master Corum.
If I am the only one who can help you further with your ambitions, Prince Shule, then I can surely afford to be.
I'm glad you're not immortal, Master Corum. Your arrogance will only plague me for a few hundred years at the most. Very well, I will show you Relina, and I will show you that she is safe, but I will not release her. I will keep her here and deliver her to you when the heart of the Knight of Swords is brought to me.
What use is the heart to you?
With it, I can bargain very well.
You may have the ambitions of a god, Master Shule, but you have the methods of a peddler.
Prince Shule, your insults do not touch me. And scene. I thought we killed that, personally.
Yeah, that reminds me why I've never attempted acting. Ever.
Well, you know, when I was reading that earlier, I was thinking, right, how do we summarise this? There's lots of good stuff in there. I really love I love it when Moorcock does long dialogue interchanges. And Shule really kind of betrays what a massive wanger he is.
Oh, yeah.
That entire thing.
He's just a petty kind of... he's the Dominic Raab of sorcerers. You know, like just...
It really is.
Just a petty weasel, just oh yeah, but look how powerful I am. Ooh, but I'm not gonna leave this house. Ooh.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things going on there. There's a few things to unpack. One is I really love the stuff about the Mabden dream, and it's the dream of a god that just is your reality. Your entire reality is just the dream of some god or other. I really like that reference to the Mabden dream, and you know, you live the Vadag dream went for a long time, but now you live in the Mabden dream. I really like that.
Yeah, and the Vadag one was probably a bit boring.
Yeah,
for most people.
Well, unless you're really into having a music room with like a big stack of old school, like analog, huge switch, clunky separates, and recording equipment, and a massive mixing desk. And you're into music, you could probably occupy yourself in there for a few hundred years, I reckon.
Yeah, I'd be all right with that.
And some of the other stuff I really like in there is not just the kind of the dialogue and the interchange between them, but it's that old classic Moorcock thing, which becomes really the MO, certainly of the Corum books, but also latterly some of the Hawkmoon books, which is, okay, let's go engage quest mode.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing, you know, it's quite hard not to interject when you've got a massive Basil exposition piece, isn't it? But
yeah,
it does go on for a bit, doesn't it? And it just shows, you know, Corum has got a bit of steel to him as well, isn't it? He's kind of like, nah, you are a knobhead, shut up.
Yeah, he's not impressed, is he?
Yeah, and then realises... Yeah, I think his main problem is the lack of a hand and an eye, isn't it?
Yeah.
Otherwise, he'd be all right.
Yeah.
I think Prince Shule, every time I read it, I go, "Oh, what a great kind of NPC he'd make."
Yeah.
But also
make a great villain, wouldn't he? Just to really get on everybody's tits.
Yeah, but a really crap villain. So if you're making the TV show, it'd be great. Just you could probably elongate that out for an entire episode, couldn't you?
Right. Well, I suppose now is a good time to engage with Lord Shark's ostentatious couch. This show is just shaped like a giant D20 with sharp pointed corners, that's extraordinarily uncomfortable to sit on unless you use a cushion. Who would you cast as Shule Angevin? I suppose it's a little bit tricky because he's a beautiful youth with ancient eyes wearing gold samite, and I'm not particularly up on beautiful youth actors.
No, but I think you can probably bypass that. I would go for guy who played Moriarty.
Oh, Andrew Scott.
Yeah, Andrew Scott. He'd be the one for me, I think.
Andrew Scott does play a good knobhead.
Yeah, and he also plays. Yeah, I just think he's a great actor anyway, with lots of different stuff. But he'd be ideal for Shul, I think. He'd just you just watch him go, oh, I'd want to punch him so much. I want to hit you so hard, Shul.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't got kind of further into the story yet, so we don't know how or in what shape Shul shows up further down the line. And it's certainly too long since I've read it to actually remember. But I think Andrew Scott is a good shout. But of course, he also pops up in a couple of other guises just in these short chapters, doesn't he? So after this, he he disappears in a puff of smoke, and then Corum finds himself back in another room, and Shul shows him a vision. And Shul now is described as an anthropoid in a green jacket and breeks.
He's a big fan of breeks, isn't he, Moorcock?
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. Well, this is awesome because we get breeks, but he wears a different kind of trousers for his next incarnation. But he shows Corum a vision of Relina in the bed, but the dead Margrave is in the sack with her. Fortunately, he's not getting jiggy with her. That would have been horrible. But he has got her in a deathly embrace, and she's freaking out a little bit. So Corum objects, and Shul frees her, and suddenly she's in the room with them. And then he explains that he's released the Margrave from his undeath and let him go back to the depths of the ocean. So Corum explains to Relina that he's made a bargain and is engaged quest mode. And Relina's not overly impressed with all this business. But he lets her know anyway. I mean, to be fair, I think she's keeping quite a straight head of things, because considering she's been in a trance in her dead husband's ship in a rotting bed, and a minute ago he was laid in bed with her, the fact that Corum has entered into a pact in order to get her out of what is basically Shitsville, she's still pretty dubious about the whole thing.
Yeah, and they have a bath, don't they? So you go a bath.
Yeah, he baths her, gets her to bed with fresh clothing and everything else, and Shul vanishes. And a moment later, the large room was full of furniture and everything else Corum had desired. Corum could not doubt Shul's powers, but he did doubt the being's sanity. He undressed Relina and washed her and put her into the bed. She awoke then, and her eyes were still full of fear, but she smiled at Corum. "You're safe now," he said. "Sleep." Now Corum bathed himself and inspected the clothes that had been laid out for him. He pursed his lips as he picked up the folded garments and looked at the armour and weapons that had also been provided. They were Vadag clothes. There was even a scarlet robe that was almost certainly his own. He began to consider the implications of his alliance with the strange and amoral sorcerer of Svi and Fan Labrule, which, of course, we find over leaf in Chapter 2, the Eye of Rin and the Hand of Quill, which is a good reminder that it's not the Eye of Rill and the Hand of Quim, which I always get wrong, that actually this island has got a fairly disturbing name. But before we get there, Shul is now a beautiful 15-year-old girl with an obscene chuckle.
Yeah, that's not very nice, is it?
No, it's a good description there. It's a straightforward, sharp description. Beautiful 15-year-old girl with an obscene chuckle.
An obscene chuckle. It's that
few words, but conjures up strange images.
And then you've got quite a nice kind of description of the room as well. Yeah, dark and cluttered, all manner of plants and stuffed animals, books and manuscripts teetered on crazily leaning shelves. There are crystals of peculiar colour and cut, bits of armour, jewelled swords, rotting sacks from which treasure as well as other nameless substances spilled. There were paintings and figurines, an assortment of instruments and gauges, including balances, and what appeared to be clocks with eccentric divisions marked in languages Corum did not know. Living creatures scuffled amongst the piles and chittered in corners. The place stank of dust and mould and death.
Sadly, no two-man canoes.
Yeah, which is disappointing. But, that's... you go to Shul's place, you can nick some chittering animals.
Yeah.
Some. He's quite into crystals, isn't he, Moorcock? Most of his kind of his machines run on crystals of some description, don't they?
Yeah, that's another paragraph I really like though, because
it's great. Yeah,
it's really vivid, And it reminds me of something you'd get in a Jim Henson thing, like Labyrinth or The Dark Crystal or something like that. You know, the kind of things that he describes in the chittering creatures running backwards and forwards. That's what you'd get in a Jim Henson film. And Jim Henson did read Moorcock, so it kind of it was mates with Rodney Matthews, and he kind of discovered Moorcock stuff through being friends with Rodney Matthews and read some Moorcock. Yeah,
I think the so I'll just come back to that in a sec, but the next line's quite amusing as well, if it was read properly, which I won't do, but it was, you do not, I think, attract many customers, Corum said.
Yeah.
Which is brilliant. But I think, for me, when I read this book, bearing in mind most of the fantasy books that had sorcerers or wizards in, they're all like a facsimile of Gandalf or whoever, weren't they? So pointy hats, massive beards, probably a dress and a big stick. And then you read something like this, and there's like a petty shit-kicking sorcerer who does really weird stuff and has a really just I don't know. It was just quite interesting when I first read it. It was like, well, this isn't normal magic.
No, and the brilliant thing about it is it's evidently extraordinarily powerful, but is still a snivelling weasel.
Yeah.
It's just an absolute tit.
And he's a bit lazy, I think. So his room's a bit of a pigsty, isn't it? I just need to quickly rinse out this glass for my next beer.
Okay. Well, in that case, I shall down mine and prepare my next one. Okay, what you got?
A couple of boring ones, really. I've got... this one is called Baby-Faced Assassin. Got a chicken on it, and it's an Indian pale ale.
Boring.
I know, I didn't have a lot of time to crank up any comedy beers, really.
Right. Well, I've got another one from Fuller's. Fuller's, they don't do Landlord, do they? What do Fuller's do? I can't remember. Anyway, but they're a fairly well-known London brewery. So I've got Fuller's and Friends Respect Your Elders, which is a Mosaic ESB. What's an ESB?
An electric stout beer, I think.
Old brewery meets new brewery and bonds of the mutual appreciation of ESB. That's the story behind this beer, which gives the classic style a contemporary topical twist. With a trio of New World hops, this malty, marmalade beer beautifully bridges the generation gap. Yeah. A lot of these labels, they're just like fucking management speak, aren't they?
Yeah. I've got this one, which is the Baby-Faced Assassin, is a deceptively drinkable IPA that shouldn't be taken lightly. It flavours of mango, apricot, grapefruit and mandarin.
So, anyway, but Shule roots around and comes up with a pair of sacks, and it turns out he's got the eye of one dead god and the six-fingered hand of another. Two ancient warring brother gods that disappeared aeons ago. And Corum's a bit dubious, but you know, it's magic items, isn't it? You can't turn down magic items.
It is pretty much, isn't it? I was just going to say, Shule put out his girl's tongue and lipped his girl's lips. The old eyes glittered at Corum. The gifts I have here, they once belonged to the warring gods. What I found weird about this as well, having, you know, once you've read all the Moorcock stuff, is going back to the Quill and Rin kind of godhood piece, is where they fit into the multiverse, really.
Well, that's the interesting thing. They're just like completely separate from it. It's like they're almost cosmically detached.
Yeah,
aren't they?
Cosmically weird as well, aren't they?
Yeah,
So,
and we found a little bit more about them probably at the end of the fourth book, but nothing whatsoever in between. No. And all we do know is they essentially turn Corum into a demigod level ass kicking machine.
Yeah,
because of their powers. So he passes out and he wakes up and they're attached to him. And Rolena's horrified, and she's sat up in bed going, "What the fuck is going on with your eye and your hand?"
Yeah.
And
he probably would, wouldn't
he? Yeah, well, yeah, I guess so. He looked down at his left hand. It was of similar proportions to the old, but it was six-fingered and the skin was like that of a jewelled snake. You see, I think that's quite cool. He staggered as he strove to accept what had happened to him. These are Shul's gifts, he murmured inanely. They are the eye of Rin and the hand of Quill. They were gods, the lost gods, Shul said. Now I am whole again, Relina. Whole? You are something more and something less than whole, Corum. Why did you accept such terrible gifts? They're evil. They'll destroy you. I accepted them so that I might accomplish the task that Shul has set me, and thus gain the freedom of us both. I accepted them so I might seek out Glandith and, if possible, strangle him with his alien hand. I accepted them because if I did not accept them, I would perish. Perhaps, she said softly, it would be better for us to perish. So, yeah, she's quite rationalist as well, isn't she? And certainly anti-Hand of Rill.
She's not a massive fan, is she, to be honest, with his new magic eye?
No, she's not. So she's not convinced by any of it. And I still think she's given him quite a tough time considering where she was half an hour ago.
Yeah, she's not happy, is she, really?
No, which, okay, fair enough. She's not happy, but give him a break. He's doing all this for her, isn't he?
Is he, though? Is he really? Because he's quite into this vengeance piece, isn't he?
There is that.
Yeah, so you can appreciate, you want your hand and your eye back, but...
Yeah, fucking get a grip, Corum. So you've lost your eye. So you've lost your hand.
Yeah, and your family.
What?
Yeah.
And your family. Yeah. And everybody you know. And your entire race.
Yeah, but does that warrant having a six-fingered hand? I don't think it does it?
Well, Relina says no. I say yes. I'm behind him on this.
And I think that's probably what I think. With that description, with the new eye and the weird eye patch that he has on there.
Yeah,
that's why a lot of people have struggled to draw him, I think.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the eye patch shortly. You know what, though? I think after having done a couple of Elrics, we've done the Dreaming City and Elric of Melniboné, and after having done the Duel in the Skull and Hawkmoon being such a boring, flat weirdo, okay, handy in a fight, and after having done the Eternal Champion, where Ericos is basically just a fucking Nazi.
He's not a nice man, is he?
No. Actually, I'm firmly full square behind Corum. I'm thinking...
Same here, yeah.
Yeah, Corum, I dig you. You're an interesting protagonist. I think your vengeance is a perfectly decent motivation, considering what Glandith Acre did to you. So, I'm all for it. And if you can roll in a little bit of looking after your lady along the way... what's not to like?
Yeah, I mean, he generally does get psyched off, doesn't he, for being like one of the more boring characters. But if you look at his arc, especially in this particular book as well, it's quite a big one, isn't it? You've gone from somebody pouncing around doing your symphonies for a couple of decades to holy shit, what's this guy having to go through to just make sense of what's going on? And still, the first book is. Even up to the end of it, is pretty much going, is this real or what the hell's going on here? Because it's just mental, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a fever dream.
Yeah, cause it's very much, as a fantasy book, we talked about it before, world building and stuff like that, but this is probably Moorcock's most psychedelic set of stories, these first three, I think, because they just it's the equivalent of the double gatefold sleeve artwork craziness, isn't it?
Yeah,
and that's probably why nobody's ever picked up and gone, let's make some Corum films. It'd be brilliant because it'd have to be directed by David Lynch, wouldn't it, or somebody equally as crazy.
Tassim Singh.
Yeah, and it's one of those things when you watch a film like Valerian, which I'm not advocating is a good film, or even Fifth Element. Again, not a great film, but at least the ingenuity and the imagination of it is pretty much out there, and it's really cool. Crack film.
Well, I'll fight for the Fifth Element because I love it. But
I like Fifth Element.
Yeah, but Valerian, I think, really, really suffers from its leads. How, and no offense, Dane, but how Dane DeHaan keeps getting leading roles in movies, I found it baffling. Anyway. Really good idea. Dane DeHaan is like a charisma vacuum who sucks all the joy and interest out of it. Anyway, we've okay. Lord Shark's ostentatious couch. Dane DeHaan as Corum. No,
he can be Hawkmoon.
yeah, it could be Hawkmoon. So anyway, chapter 3, Beyond the 15 Planes. And this is a top draw chapter. I love this. I'm loving Knight of the Swords all round, but I really dig this chapter. And Shul takes on a new form again, a bear in a plumed helmet wearing trews. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, and this is why, why there isn't a Corum RPG out there that everybody's playing every week is just beyond me. You've got bears wearing trousers, sorcerers of 15-year-old girls. That sounds a bit sinister, but not meant to be. It's just amazing.
Well, I think we did mention last time around, or maybe on the Moorcock RPG episode, there is that Dark Side Corum game, which I think probably is the best example of certainly any of the Chaosium. Well, even though it's not a Chaosium product, but it was for the Chaosium game. It was for Elric Stroke Stormbringer 5th edition, wasn't it? Yeah. That is great. The artwork's fucking beautiful as well, apart from the cover, which is questionable. And of course, Dirk the Dice is running Corum at Grogmeat next week.
He is, which is a shame I can't make it.
Well, you know what to do. So, anyway, Shul's a bit full of himself and pleased with his handiwork, but Corum's not actually that impressed until he sees suddenly through the eye, after initially complaining that it don't work, like it's bust or something.
Yeah, a broken eye. What have you sold me?
Corum frowned suspiciously at the sorcerer. The action made him blink. Suddenly, through his new eye, he saw many new images, while still staring at Shul with his ordinary eye. They were dark images, and they shifted until eventually one predominated. Shul, what is this world? I'm not sure. Some say there are another 15 planes, which are a kind of distorted mirror image of our own planes. This could be such a place, eh? Things boiled and bubbled, appeared and disappeared. Creatures crept upon the scene and then crept back again. Flames curled. Land turned to liquid. Strange beasts grew to huge proportions and shrank again. Flesh seemed to flow and reform. I love that. It's great.
Yeah, it is. And that's chaos, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Pure chaos.
And once again, that's something where you need a really visionary director, or certainly a cinematographer and special effects guy, to really make something interesting out of that. Yeah. But Shul explains that the eye allows him to see into the 15 planes and gives him a rather ostentatious eye patch that blocks the 15 planes but allows normal sight otherwise. And how is it described? It's described as a shield, isn't it? But it's like... It's a bit fancy-pantsy with jewels and all sorts of other gubbins on it. I think you're right. Whenever people draw Corum, they always have this challenge where not only have they got to get Corum right, but they've got to come up with some kind of look for him based upon this description. I quite like the P. Craig Russell Corum in a way, but I don't think they've ever really got it quite right. I don't think anybody's really captured Corum satisfactorily. Apart from Simon Perrins, of course, on the Breakfast in the Ruins banner, which is awesome. So shout out for Simon there.
Yeah. So then we get back to the who's got the biggest wanger competition between Corum and Shul, don't they, when they start having a go at each other again.
And actually Relina gets stuck in as well. She has a bit of a ding dong with Shul. But then they get down to the business of the heart of the Knight of the Swords. And it turns out that Shul's island home is a bit grim, and it's full of weird big plants that move and make a sickly scent. And we found out that the island of the Gorged God was named after the previous owner, who gorged on children, as it happens. Yeah. And that's a little bit unpleasant, a little bit freaky.
I think the other thing about that, so it's quite a grim kind of backstory, but almost cartoonish, or it reminds me of like the Harryhausen kind of things. But then he said, and how did you take over the island? The god ate children. One a day was sacrificing to the ancestors you call the Nadrag. Having plenty of money, it occurred to me to buy a good number of children and feed them to him all at once to see what would happen. And what did happen? He gobbled them up and fell into a gorged slumber. And then you crept up and killed him. No such thing. I captured him. He's one of his own dungeons somewhere. There is no longer the fine being he was when I inherited his palace. And I think that for me sums up Shul and Driven as a bit of a wrong'un.
Yeah, and he says, there's another reason why the knight or any of the others don't trouble me too much, for I hold Pilproth prisoner, which is quite a wacky name. So yeah, so all the while you've got this description going on. You've got weird, massive, meaty plants trying to touch Corum up, like constantly. They're either wrapping themselves around his waist or stroking his hand. It's all really fucking queasy. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah. So one of the reasons the other gods don't destroy the island is because he's got him.
Yeah, that's right. He's got Pilproth imprisoned.
The gorge.
So they get to talking about where the heart is, and Corum's like, "Come on, where's the heart? You can tell me." And he says, "It's beyond the 1,000-league reef, a place called Erda that is sometimes land and sometimes water. Beyond that is the desert called Drunhazat. Beyond the desert are the Flamelands, where dwells the blind queen Uruse. And beyond the Flamelands is the ice wilderness, where the Brickling wander." Corum paused to peel a sticky leaf from his face. The thing seemed to have tiny red lips which kissed him. "And beyond that," he asked sardonically. "Why, beyond that is the domain of the Knight of the Swords."
I think that bit there and the sardonic thing was quite a big thing for Moorcock, isn't it? It's the first time I ever came across the word and had to look it up.
Yeah.
And it's almost
I actually saw someone mention that on Twitter, saying that reading Corum, actually, that they had to look up the word sardonic for the first time.
Yeah, when I first read it, it was like, sardonic and quintessential was another one. There's quite a few words that I kind of picked up. But I think if you just go back to that bit where he's going, "And beyond the 1,000-league reef is a place called Erda, and then there's a place called Drunhazar, and then there's a desert," he goes, "and beyond that, what are you?"
Yeah. And beyond the land of wobbles are the hills of cherries.
Yeah. And then you have to go through the umbrellas of Pat Ferrick.
Yeah. And then Corum just goes, "This adventure's boring. It's just on a rail."
This is just railroading me, man.
Yeah.
I'm off to the forest.
Anyway, we also find out that the plants that keep touching him up actually eat meat, and Shul occasionally draws in ships to feed them. He really is a massive tosser.
He really is. He's not got much going for him, has he?
No, he doesn't.
And how many bags of hands has he got? That's what I want to know.
I don't know, but I do love the fact that all the way through this, he's a bear in a plumed helmet wearing trews.
Yeah, exactly.
I could almost warm to him.
And again, that would lose quite a bit of the audience, wouldn't it, if you had it as a TV show? There's Andrew Scott. Andrew Scott is now a 50-year-old girl, and now he's a bear.
Now he's a bear.
Yeah,
that's right.
I'm out.
Yeah.
I would.
I wonder if you could tempt Andrew Scott and say, "Andrew, we want you to play this really crucial, critical character who's a sorcerer, but you only really provide the voice because sometimes he's a bear, sometimes he's an arthropoid in a green jacket and breeks." I wonder if he'd buy into it. I don't know. So Corum takes off his eye patch again, or his eye shield, or whatever it is, and looks into the distance and sees some kind of root. And after a little bit more exchange with Shul and Jivan and some other bits and pieces about gods, and Shul explains to him some of the nature of gods. And Corum says, "We studied little mysticism along the Vadag folk, but I understand all gods to be omniscient and omnipotent." And Shul says, "Only on very limited levels. Some gods, the Mabden pantheon, such as the dog and the horned bear," oh bless them, the Mabden have got a really simple pantheon, haven't they?
Yeah.
The dog and the horned bear are more or less omniscient concerning the affairs of Mabden, and they can, if they wish, control those affairs to a large degree. But they know nothing of my affairs, and even less of those of the Knight of Swords, who know most things, save those things that happen upon my well-protected island. This is an age of gods, I'm afraid, Master Corum. There are many, big and small, and they crowd the universe. Once it was not so. Sometimes, I suspect, the universe manages with none at all. It could come to pass, it's thought. Shul tapped his skull. That creates gods, and gods who create thought. There must be periods when thought, which I sometimes consider overrated, does not exist. Its existence, or lack of it, does not concern the universe after all. But if I had the power, I would make the universe concerned. Shul's eyes shone. I would alter its very nature. I would change all the conditions. You are wise to aid me, Master Corum. Corum jerked his head back as something very much like a giant mauve tulip, but with teeth, snapped at him.
Just to bring it down to earth.
Yeah. I doubt it, Shewell, but then I have no choice. Indeed you have not, or at least your choice is much limited. It is the ambition I hold not to be forced to make choices, on however large a scale, which drives me on, Master Corum. Aye, nodded Corum ironically. We are all mortal. Speak for yourself, Master Corum. And thus ends Book 2. And I haven't actually commented yet on this Respect Your Elders stuff, this Mosaic ESB. I've got to look up what an ESB is. Listeners, if you know what an ESB is, and if you're beer fans, please do let us know. I won't look it up. I'll rely on our listeners to tell us. It's all right.
Was it? Yeah, this one's all right, actually. It's one of your Commodore Garden, pale ales. It's all right. They all taste much of a muchness after a while, don't they?
But anyway, that was chapter 2. No, it wasn't. That was book 2 of The Knight of the Swords.
It was indeed. Yeah. And not much happened, to be fair.
Not much happened, but I think the not much that happened was really cool in the way that it happened. And I think it continues the high quality of the writing in this one. And I've got to say, I read the second Corum trilogy last. So I've read that in the last few years, unlike a lot of the stuff we've been covering. And that really does get tedious with the fetch quests.
Yeah.
But I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, I think the first and second book are really good. The third one is good, but we'll probably get to it at some
point. No spoilers.
Yeah. But I think the whole quest of this one's really cool, and it's just... once it does go super psychedelic though, and I think the second one is probably more so in a way. Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to it. I really enjoyed reading The Eternal Champion, and I very much enjoyed talking about it, but it wasn't a happy read.
I really don't like the book Eternal Champion, and I'm not. I think the Alex Scarsell one was that the Phoenix and Obsidian.
Yeah, or the Silver Warriors in the US.
Yeah, that one I kind of liked a bit more. Eternal Champion I read probably after I'd read all the Elric ones, all the Hawkmoon ones, and the Corum ones, and I went back to it and I was like, well, the whole point of the Eternal Champion is why did he end up having to fight through the multiverse for forever?
Yeah,
and you get the origin story, and it's like, because he's a complete tool.
Yeah,
basically, yeah. And then you meet different versions of Ericosa, don't you? In different books. But ultimately, it's a bit of a knobber, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I appreciate the book rather than enjoying the book is how deliberately challenging it is. Yeah. And I think when I originally read it, I probably didn't. It's funny doing this because you read it and you think about it a little bit more as you talk about it, and you kind of discuss it with somebody else and you tease things out. What I really appreciate about the Eternal Champion is what he says about the heroic archetype, and how actually he kind of inverts it, and I really did like that. Would I be in a hurry to read it again? Probably not. But I do appreciate it for what it is, and I think he was way ahead of himself, actually. Although he describes it himself, he was writing it as an angry teenager, or the original 60-page short story, he wrote it as an angry teenager railing against the world. But it still has that core element of Moorcock, which is fascism is bollocks.
Yeah, definitely. I think,
and I really like, that's the thing I really do admire about it.
Yeah, and I think it's just a weird book, isn't it? I think it's a very strange book, but it's almost like when was that? When he started tying it all together, that's the strange part of it, isn't it? Because you obviously had to have that arc of start to finish, which has obviously changed over the years.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. He starts to try and tie all that together, doesn't he, in the 70s, which culminates in the quest for Tanalorn, which, frankly, when we get... I do look forward to getting to that and reading it again, because I hadn't read it for 25 years, because I remember at the time reading it thinking, oh, fuck off. It was so unsatisfying.
The only bit I really like is the Corum bit, because that really brings a bit of closure to it all.
Yeah. On a slightly different note, I am opening up a Kiyuchi Brewery white ale, which everything in it is in Japanese.
Oh, I really like that one. It's great. Is that the one with the bird on the front?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. It's great. It's one of my faves.
I'm going in full throttle. So, on a slightly different note, and I mean, obviously we'll get around to book 3 at some point soon, but on a slightly different note, I've been thinking about this podcast being a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast.
Yeah.
And of course, part of the podcast is around books that came to me via Pops, and of course for the Halloween special we covered The Rats, which was good fun. But I picked up last week the top 100 fantasy books, basically a book-by-book opinion by Moorcock and James Cawthorne on their top 100 fantasy books. So I think from time to time, what we might have to do is dip into that list and do one of Moorcock and Cawthorne's top 100, and not break it down in the detail we do with the Moorcock books, but perhaps do it like we did with The Rats, read the book and talk about it for an hour.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And kind of tie that in as an occasional episode as well.
And I've got one kind of recommendation stroke thought. Michael Chabon's probably one of my favourite writers, and he's into... So he wrote a book called Gentleman of the Road, and it's basically inspired by Moorcock, and it's about two Jewish swordsmen with hilarious adventures therein. So he wrote the Cavalier and Clay book, and he's probably one of my favourite writers. But this is a really cool kind of... I think he did it almost as a homage to Moorcock, because he's talked about Moorcock before in some of his kind of essays and things like that.
Yeah,
and it is basically but it's quite interesting because it's set in... There's like one of the characters. It's a bit like Elric and Moonglum, Stroke, Fafard and the Grey Mouse kind of stuff. So one's really massive, the other one's like a doctor, but he's kind of weaved in the kind of Jewish mythology of it, and it's in like Kazakhstan and around there. It's just really cool. So that would be quite
sounds interesting.
It'd be quite a good one. It's really thin as well, and it's...
I was about to say, is it less than 160 pages?
Yeah, well, I can't remember.
Yes,
but I've got it.
Let's do it.
But it is really thin, and I think it'd be a really good one to read, just because he's always talked about what a massive influence Moorcock is on him, and he's done a Sherlock Holmes one as well. But he's such a good writer. It was Pulitzer Prize.
All right, cool.
But that'd be a good one.
Anyway, thanks once again for joining me in virtual Derry and Tom's on this occasion and discussing The Knight of the Swords Book 2. And we'll be back shortly, I'm sure, to do Book 3. And then, of course, once we've done Book 3, we're going to have to decide what you do next. Daenus and the Dark Straits of Reglathium has been snapped up by Tash.
Excellent.
And we're doing that. We're doing that as a one-shit book. Yeah. So you're spared that. But just so you know, I've also picked up The Conquerors of Reglathium, The Caves of Reglathium, Prisoner of Reglathium. So, you never know.
I think life is a bit too short, isn't it?
On early experience of reading Daenus, The Dark Straits of Reglathium, whether I'll manage to do another one, I'm not entirely sure. I would at least have to wait a few IAMs before I made that decision.
That's fair. At least
inside a joke. But, that said, and I don't know how you feel about this, there's quite a lot of movement amongst the patrons suggesting that we look at Nine Princes in Amber.
It's not a bad shout. Or we could go for Behold the Man.
Yeah, Behold the Man is always at the back of my mind. But before we get to Behold the Man, I want to do War on the World's Pain. I want to do Warlord of the Air. I want to get those big beasts out the way before we tackle Behold the Man.
To be honest, from my point of view, the Bastable books I've read once. Like,
What do you fancy doing Warlord of the Air then?
yeah, definitely, yeah. We'll get Corum out. When I say out of the way, we need to give Corum his dues.
We do indeed.
We might need to skip the Super Quest Ram Stroke Bull trilogy.
Oh, we'll do them eventually, but we've got all the time in the world. But I think the things that are at the back of my mind that I want to get to are I want to do Sailor on the Seas of Fate.
Yep, which is the first Elric book I read.
Yep, that's a biggie for me as well. It wasn't the first one I read, but it was one of the earlier ones that I bought for myself after reading Stormbringer.
Yep.
So I want to do Sail on the Seas of Fate, and actually our extraordinary patron Anthony Piconti actually suggested it, so we've got to take that on board. And so we'll give it some thought. Warlord of the Air will definitely get on the schedule. Sailor on the Seas of Fate will get on the schedule. And possibly looking at another couple of bits and bobs like Nine Princes in Amber. And at some point, as another side excursion from Moorcock and an excursion more into those books that Pops gave me, I'll be doing Wheels of Terror with Robbo.
Really?
Yeah, which will be interesting.
Cool.
So, hello there, Robbo. I understand you've got your USB microphone sorted out, and we're going to be testing it. And Robbo's been giving it a read, and we're going to give that a look at some point. But
excellent.
We'll be back soon with Knight of the Swords, Book 3. And also, they've actually been, since we did the Rats, there have been a couple of requests for us to do the Fog.
And the Spear, surely.
Well, actually, I have been thinking, after reading the Rats, I've been thinking I should probably revisit the Spear, because I do remember really enjoying it, and it being actually a really good thriller with a horror element to it.
Yeah, it was mostly stupid, but it had its points, didn't it?
Yeah, good stuff. But anyway, cheers, Loz. It's been a pleasure as always. And, see you next time.
See you later.
Thanks as ever to Loz for being a great co-host. And also thanks to our patrons. First up, our Chaos Engineers, hard at work in the belly of the ship. Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Van Ness, Fred, David, Jim, John Lays, John Watt, Nelbert, Simon Perrins, Robbo, Malpertwee, and Ben. And also to our Jugaderos over at the Terminal Cafe, working to gain that winning hand. Clarkey, Craig, Loz, Matthew, Randall, Steve, Tom, Ian, and Alexander. And of course to Master Piconti, supporter extraordinaire, currently perusing the Don Blass's limited library and finding it wanting. To Lord Norman, baker on the rocks, baking weird treats in between harsh, confusing blasts from the choirs of the Wuzzo birds. And to the lapsed gamer, sadly lamenting losing his grasp on those last but most delicious victuals in the houses of the Sufus prior to the closure of the landlord's gates. And to Dread Mortmain, always behind the curve in the ways of Ash, but ever yearning to catch up and burn things.
Groovy.
And last but not least, to Sir Neil of Burton, the Destiny Knight, etcher of every single solitary stone in the Court of the Bowl, much to the Elector's annoyance. Right, that's about it from me for now. Stay tuned for Chapter 6 of the Journal of Gerard Arthur Connolly after the transition. And before I go, don't forget you can follow and gab with us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The blog is at breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too, and we're out there on most podcatchers. If you have a favourite and we're not on it, drop me a line and I'll see what I can do about it. So, in the meantime, until we talk again, stay safe, and I'll see you soon on the Moonbeam Roads. The Journal of Gerard Arthur Connolly, Chapter 6. Sore feet, a bath at last, and a late dinner. We made Gravenberg by nightfall. If the castle had ever had any defensive walls to speak of, they had long since crumbled into the soil. A number of low stone buildings cowered close into the keep as if seeking shelter from the wind that scoured the high hill upon which it stood, commanding a view of the approaches from the forest and the desolate lowland marsh that fell away behind it. I thought it fleetingly strange that despite its prominent position in the landscape hereabouts, we had not seen it from the road until almost at the foot of the hill. I attributed the oversight to fatigue. Pallid light flickered from lanterns that framed an iron-shod wooden door of hefty proportions, a front door complete with knocker. "I confess I'm somewhat underwhelmed," said Friedrich. "We four could take this castle." He may have been right. We had observed no guards or watchmen, and there was no sight or sound of hounds or any kind of sentry, animal or otherwise. "Be on your guard," replied his brother. "There are other methods that can guard a keep that are not so obvious." Behind me, Morton grumbled, "In Scandia, castle guards you." I turned and looked at him, not entirely grasping his meaning. I clapped him on the shoulder, though, and banged the door knocker 3 times. A gaunt young man with hooded eyes opened the stout door, and, following Vincent's introduction, of himself, his brother, and his retainers, he ushered us in. The interior was sparsely appointed with faded tapestries, and one-slush runners now worn flat and threadbare by heavy-shod feet. Our guide introduced himself as Carl, and invited us to follow him past a number of side chambers and on up a shallow staircase onto a gallery that overlooked a reception hall. My eyes were fixed instantly upon a glowing hearth, but my instinct to throw myself on the fair rug before it and sleep for a year was interrupted by a sensation in the corner of my eye. I looked for the source of the distraction, but saw only stone wall. A trick of the flickering light, perhaps. It was like an itch in my vision, but it passed as we left the gallery. Carl led us down steps and toward the fireplace, which was framed by a colossal mantle of some dark form of marble. Arrayed around the walls were items of furniture which we were invited to pull close. "Please, make yourself comfortable. I will arrange victuals and inform the Count of your arrival." Carl exited through a door in a dark corner where the firelight did not penetrate. I achingly extricated myself from my deck coat and draped it over the back of the high chair I had chosen. I pulled my boots from my protesting feet and examined the soles. The 6-week-old Italian leather had almost worn down at the heel thanks to 4 days of yomping, for which such luxuriant craftsmanship was never intended. I sighed as I realised that finding a cobbler worthy of these boots would probably be a tall order in these parts. Next, examining my socks, I winced in pain as I pulled them free. In places, my blisters had worn away, leaving gaping sores to which the fabric had adhered with matted blood. I almost jumped out of my skin with a yelp when a voice said by my ear, "A bath and some salve will ease your discomfort." The voice was deep and soft, unmistakably feminine. The other 3 looked up from their private ruminations in surprise. Morton drooled slightly. The voice belonged to a handsome young woman, generous but by no means overly proportioned, and draped in ermine and samite. She was accompanied by another man, similar in appearance and garb to the first. He bore a platter of meats, breads and cheeses, which he placed on a low table by the fire before withdrawing. "I am Sabine," she declared. We introduced ourselves. Her face was not unattractive, but bore the heavy, ruddy features of the region, and her attempts at a noble bearing were noticeably that. Still, she made an agreeable hostess, and I thanked my stars that I had not been found at a disadvantage by a lady of breeding. Her eyes met mine, and she lingeringly examined me, taking in every detail: my haircut, my clothes, my general bearing. Had she been at all my sort, I would have found this exciting. As it is, she simply seemed enraptured for a moment by the likes of which she had never seen. It was a perfectly normal human reaction, and one I had engendered countless times during my travels. She shortly transferred her attention to the Scandian, from whence she found her attention reciprocated in kind. I cleared my throat. "A bath would be most welcome, my dear. Could you direct me to the bathroom?" "Countess Sabine," she said pointedly. I bowed slightly from the hip. "Of course, Countess." "Carl, Sebastian," she called. The 2 men emerged from shadow. "Please show Herr Connolly, Lieutenant," I corrected sharply. Her cheeks deepened in colour, and I'm sure she bit back a curse. Please escort Lieutenant Connolly to his quarters and ensure his needs are catered for. The men nodded and gestured towards another recessed door in the gloom of the hall. Carl collected my boots, socks and haversack from the rug, and I allowed myself to be led, wincing slightly at every step, up to a hallway 2 levels above the floor of the hall. As we proceeded, I noticed that paintings were hanging at intervals in the hallway, the gap between each punctuated by another recessed doorway. Each door was framed in darkness, and none had the telltale crack of light at the base, indicating occupancy. The paintings were variously gradable by age according to the amount of decay to the weathered canvases. Almost all, however, portrayed the likeness of a man, or generations of men, of the same family. A similarity existed in each that suggested that the current Count Baden was from a long line of succession stretching back some considerable distance. It became apparent also that Sebastian and Carl had some features in common with the men in the paintings. At the far end of the carving hallway, that must have taken us to the other side of the keep by now, a door stood ajar and a soft light emanated from within. I was ushered inside to find a steaming bath in the alcove of a sparsely appointed bedchamber. The presence of a roaring fire and a huge bed were enough, however, to make me feel immediately grateful to my hosts. The men withdrew after indicating heavy towels and a clay pot by the fire. Before closing the door, one of them, I'm not sure which, as I was already undressing, said, "The Count will see you at dinner in 1 hour." I nodded, and the door closed. Dinner was a lugubrious affair. Count Johann Baden II was evidently not overused to company, and, beyond platitudes apparently intended to indicate sympathy with the heirs of Sarbrok, he had little to say, and seemed if anything impatient to wrap up the occasion and leave. The Countess said little, and barely looked up from her plate, other than when snatching glances at Morton, who appeared troubled, although his appetite was certainly not damaged. Sebastian and Carl did not share our meal, but served us. In the flesh, it was apparent that the Count was of the same blood as they. The wine they served was sweet and heady, and Friedrich had evidently become as impatient as I at the pregnant pauses between each burst of dialogue. "I must say this for you, Count, you keep a sensational cellar," he said, before quaffing the remnants of his cup and holding it out to Carl for a refill. "I am gratified that it pleases you," the Count replied steadily as he meticulously cut a piece of breast from a delicious platter of slow-roasted capon with fennel. "It came from some distance away, and I doubt very much you will find the like anywhere else." "I would be intrigued to know where you sourced it," Frederick pursued, but he was brought to a halt by the Count. "We receive few visitors. The road to Gravenberg is seldom trod these days. Beyond us lay the marshes. We are on the way to nowhere. What brought you here?" He continued to eat steadily. Each of us glanced at another for inspiration, discomforted by the sudden change of tack. Vincent spoke up first. "The roads are watched by scouts and ornithopters. We had thought of making for Berlin and the court of Prince Lobkowitz, but we were overtaken by events." "Events?" The Count arched a brow. For the first time his face appeared less the mask of pallid flesh it had been, and his eyes shone. I took a moment to study him closely. He was tall and broad at the shoulder, a characteristic not shared by Sebastian and Carl. His clothing was rich, but faded and worn, much like the keep in which he dwelled. But now he appeared engaged. His face betrayed an intelligence that was not present moments ago when he appeared bored. I found it impossible to determine his age. His face was weathered and pockmarked, his hair and beard greying, but he seemed, now at least, possessed of something vital and strong. He could have been anywhere between a weathered 40 and a healthy 70. Vincent explained our last 2 days, and the Count listened intently. "It is true," he said, "I am no friend of Londra. I travelled there many years ago. The people of that isle are a sick breed, and ever have been. Even in times when they were not so rabidly twisted and paranoid, they were ever a peculiar sort." I wondered what he meant by that. As if reading my thoughts, he looked directly at me and said, "Eccentric, arrogant, wrong-headed, jingoistic, they would call it at times." His gaze held mine for a moment, then dropped back to his plate. "Nevertheless, you can see that we are not equipped as a stage from which to fight a war." "Do you not fear their presence on your lands?" asked Morton. "Of course not," scoffed the Count. "We are well protected here, are we not, my dear?" He patted the hand of his wife, who shifted uncomfortably and nodded. "Now, I must retire," he said. "It has been a long day, and I am not as young as I once was." He stood, nodded, and led the Countess away. Before leaving the hall, he turned to us and addressed us once more. "You are my guests. My home is yours. I strongly recommend that you do not stray far from the keep tonight. The marsh is home to strange creatures. I believe a barragoon may have made home there recently." And with that they left. "What's a barragoon?" I said.